Our next presentation is from someone I introduced, by the way, to was it Chipotle? Chipotle peanut butter and jelly hamburgers. They're phenomenal. They're phenomenal, I'm telling you. They're amazing. But I first met Jacob in Scottsdale. We went to lunch at a place called Rehab Burger, where it makes you go to rehab, a heart rehab. And loved speaking with him. I love what Jacob does with Thoughtful Faith. He's very different in the sense that he can really articulate the arguments. He will debate anybody, by the way. He will debate anyone. He talks to atheists. He talks to evangelicals. He talks to other Latter-day Saints. And he's got certain systems that he follows that we can all learn as we go through that. Please join me in welcoming Thoughtful Faith's Jacob Hansen.
All right, so I'm a little annoyed with Greg, though, right now, because who wants to follow Carden Ellis on the stage? And Carden knew that, and so I'm going to try not to suck. So here we go. Today I'm basically just going to be telling my story. A lot of you guys maybe have seen me debating someone or have heard about me and some of the things that I'm doing on YouTube, but I want you guys to know who I am and kind of where I came from and how this all kind of came together. So this place right here, can anyone guess what this is? It's my childhood home. It's where I grew up. I grew up in a place that was basically paradise. I lived about 10 miles down a dirt road. We had 5 acres surrounded by all of this BLM land. We had horses, we had pigs, we had chickens. And yeah, we could just roam wild. I would hunt dove and chukar and quail out of my backyard. And there were 8 of us, siblings, who grew up out here. And it was truly an amazing place. And my life was centered around this large family that I was a part of, all of us active in the church. And, you know, that's kind of where I grew up. Now, as I got older, I went to, my parents didn't like the public schools in our area. They're kind of mediocre, and they were like, we want to have you guys get a little better education. They were friends with some people who were involved in the Catholic schools in our area in Reno, and so my parents wanted me to go to Catholic schools when I got into middle school, because that's when kids start to get into trouble, and they figured, hey, I'd rather my kid go to a religious school that's Catholic than an atheist school, which is what a lot of the public schools kind of push. The only problem was that my first year of middle school, I wasn't able to get into the Catholic school, so she put me into an evangelical Protestant school. Now, you might imagine what that effect might have had on me in the 7th grade. It was actually interesting. It wasn't the students that kind of brought up the Mormonism stuff. It was actually the teachers. And I remember I had an experience at this school where it was the first time that I kind of got challenged on my religious beliefs. And they opened up the Bible, like good Protestants do, and they went to the book of Revelation, where it says you can't add or take away from the Bible. And I was like, oh no. Here I was in the 7th grade with my first ever faith crisis. And my dad, it was funny, I almost didn't want to tell my dad about it. It was like I kind of had that CES letter experience when I was like 13. And I remember I went to my dad and I was kind of like, they showed me this verse in the Bible, and I was almost nervous, like, oh no, I don't like wreck my dad's faith. I remember my dad just kind of laughed, like, and he goes, Jacob, when the book of Revelation was written, did the Bible exist? And I was like, oh. I was like, no. And he was like, so what book is it talking about when you says don't add or take away from this book? And I was like, the book of Revelation. And suddenly my faith crisis had been resolved. But it was something that happened to me where it was like I had something that I thought couldn't be overcome. Like this was it. The church isn't true anymore. And then I ended up finding out that I had missed something or there was some context. And so for the rest of my life, as I encountered challenges to my faith, I always remembered that hey, if you don't have something figured out, don't panic over it, okay? There are explanations, and sometimes it takes time or context to figure those out. It was a very positive experience for me. I went on, actually, one other thing. This is also where I learned to debate using the scriptures. Because I learned that there was something at the back of the Bible that we all have in our LDS scriptures called the topical guide. I didn't even know what that was. I always thought it was tropical guide when I was a little kid. I thought that was kind of weird. So I find this thing, and I ended up, my dad was like, yeah, anytime I'd keep my big triple combination in my backpack. He said, if they challenge you on certain topics, like God doesn't have a body, go to the topical guide and look at it. And what I'd find is there were all these verses in the Bible that supported the idea that God had a body. And I ended up now, later in life, I realized the topical guide is pretty much like a scripture response to Protestant arguments, if you actually look at it. And so use your topical guide. There's tons of great scriptures on every one of the challenges to the church when you look up the subject in the topical guide. I learned that in the 7th grade. So here was Jacob Hansen learning to debate to some degree with other people in the 7th grade at this Protestant evangelical school. I then went on to, finally got into the Catholic schools, had a wonderful experience. I learned very quickly that Catholics are a lot more chill than the evangelical Protestants, and had a great time, played sports, actually was elected the student body president of a Catholic high school as a Latter-day Saint, and I had a poster with me holding the Book of Mormon, and it said, "Don't discriminate, vote for Jake." They did actually make me take down that poster, though. I think it got a little too much traction. But it was fun. And I had a great experience with it. Love my Catholic friends to this day. So anyway, I grew up in this big Latter-day Saint family, right? Kind of what you think of. Cousins and uncles and aunts, all essentially members of the church. I then get called on a mission. This is actually my mission farewell talk. Serve in Argentina. Yeah, Argentina. Right? Amazing, amazing country. My Argentine friend back there, yes, we've been talking. She speaks the real Spanish, Castellano. Sorry to all you others. Wonderful country, had amazing experiences, challenging like nothing I'd ever done, but rewarding in amazing ways. I finished my mission. I come home in 2008. And 2 of the 3 men who got me on a mission had left the church. My father, my brother, and my uncle were the 3, and when I came home, only my father was still active in the church. And so I got kind of smacked when I got home with sort of here I was at the spiritual sort of peak, and I get confronted with sort of this shock to my system. My uncle was very, very, he would tell me all his mission stories, and he was so excited for me to go, and he had lived with us when I was a little kid, and before his mission, and then after his mission, he just always was like this person that, in my mind, was like, that person who told you cool mission stories when you were a kid, and it kind of made you excited to go on a mission? That was him for me. And when I came home from my mission, he was no longer active and hostile towards the church. My older brother had gone the atheist route, was swept up in the new atheist movement, and so for him it was interesting. I asked him, he's like, it's not the Joseph Smith stuff, Jacob, it isn't that. He's like, I've gone much deeper than that. I've been reading these books like Richard Dawkins' God Delusion, The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, and I just don't think Christianity or theism is even true. I don't believe in God. And it was it kind of hit me. Now, luckily I was at a spiritual high point. I just had so many powerful spiritual experiences that to some extent this didn't hit me as hard as it might have. But I had a good distraction coming because I had been accepted to go to BYU Hawaii. And yeah, so you can imagine a wonderful spiritual environment surrounded by all sorts of great people, and Jackson, I used to be good looking too, and it will come, and your hair might start falling out. So we all had our days when we were cool and good looking and on the beach with everybody, all right? So, but no, I had a great time, great friends, surfing, met Erica, my wife, at a bonfire. And yeah, as I said, I meet this cute girl on the beach. This is actually an interesting picture. This is, I think the day after, no, maybe 2 days after we had first met. This was our first time hanging out with a group of friends, and we were sitting next to each other, and my buddy snapped this picture, which I think is pretty cool. We didn't know Erica didn't know what she was in for at this moment, okay? She didn't know she'd be on some cruise with me doing this, that's for sure. And neither did I, by the way. So, I'll tell you what, Hawaii is a pretty cool place to fall in love and date. And then we end up getting married in the Mesa Temple. And anyway, we graduate from BYU Hawaii together. We lived in the married student housing there. Again, just like, you guys, what an amazing life I'm living. And it was funny. One day I was there, I was surfing. And there was a sun setting. I'm newly married, no big financial worries or responsibilities yet. But it was weird. It was like I felt unsatisfied, as weird as that sounded. And I came to realize that your satisfaction in life, it doesn't come from, like, I was sort of like, here I am, I'm on the beach in Hawaii, living the dream, but there's something missing in my life. And I came to realize that fulfillment in life isn't about comfort and pleasure. It's about doing something meaningful with your life. And there's nothing more meaningful than the two little dudes who showed up not too long after we were married, Oliver and Wyatt. And then 2 turned into 3 when little Dixie June showed up. And then 3 turned into 4. Whoop. 3 turned into 4 when our West man showed up. And I can tell you all right now that the thing that has, this YouTube stuff is great, but I can tell you nothing in my life, nothing I will ever do will matter as much as those little people and my wife and our family. And to be part of a gospel that puts that at the center is just so right. It's so right. But I still had to deal with these sort of challenges on this deeper level. Is my life really, is this all just sort of feel-good stuff that we're all a part of, trying to, make ourselves feel good about the fact that we don't have any meaning in our existence and we're just going to live and die and there's nothing else? I did have to confront that. But luckily I'd had these powerful sort of spiritual experiences in my life that had anchored me. Specifically, one of the most powerful ones was this day of the birth of my sons, the twins. On that day, I had a moment of personal revelation more powerful than any other moment in my life, I think. It was when across the hallway from us was another couple that had a baby. And for us, grandparents are there. This is my father-in-law, wonderful man. These boys are showing up. We are ecstatic about these little boys that are coming into our lives. And they're coming into this village of people. These uncles, these aunts, these cousins, all of them who are stable and so many good things. Like they're just landing in this beautiful situation, and across the hall I could tell it wasn't that case for that other baby. I don't know that they necessarily were expecting that child to arrive. There was a grandma there, and it looked like she had kind of a rough life too. And as I looked at that situation, I went, oh my gosh, this is why. This is why I've been taught all these things in my life. why I've been told to obey the commandments of God. The reason my father-in-law is there and is a good man who raised a good daughter is because of the principles of the gospel. And all the people out there, and there are people outside this church who live the principles of the gospel without knowing their source and origin. But I understood that life is a high-stakes game. And if you screw up and do things that aren't right, it doesn't just hurt you. It hurts the people you love the most. And that was a powerful lesson to me. So in all the intellectualizing of things that I tend to do, I had at root a strong spiritual witness that the gospel is connected to that which is good. And it builds not only individual lives, it builds communities and families and nations. And so I realized that everyone places their faith in something. Someone told me that, and just remember that and tell people that, because that's the truth. The only question is what? One of my favorite scriptures of all time is when people were beginning to leave the Lord looked at Peter and the apostles and said, "Will you go too?" And this is what he said: "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." And when I thought back on the experiences of my life and my children and all the blessings that I received, it was the words of eternal life that had built that. But I still had questions and issues I had to go through and think about. And so I went through what I call a 10-year faith remodeling project. I had to go through and try and understand these things. Where was I going to place my faith? In atheism? Now, I'm not saying that rhetorically. It's a serious thing. Are there good reasons to believe in God and to place your faith in that proposition? It doesn't mean that you're certain about it, but is that where you should place your faith? That there is no God? Is that the way you're going to live? Jordan Peterson famously says, "I live as if God exists." I'm pretty sure he's talking about faith. That's what faith is. Even when you're unsure, you place your bet on that. I remember I watched these debates. You want to know why I got into debate? Well, guess what? These debates had a big effect on me. William Lane Craig debated one of the biggest atheist names out there, Christopher Hitchens. John Lennox is an absolute legend. He debated Richard Dawkins. And of course, Jordan Peterson ended up having his famous conversation with Sam Harris. Those had a big effect on me. I watched these people engage with the biggest minds of the movement that had swept up my brother, and I looked at it and I said, these guys are intelligent people who have very powerful arguments for why it's reasonable and rational to place your faith in God. And so I decided, well, I'm at least not an atheist. But am I just vaguely spiritual, as a lot of people are? Well, go read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. If you believe in God, where does Jesus fit into that picture? I love Mere Christianity. It's one of my favorite books in the world. Tom Holland did this amazing interview where he talked about, he's an atheist, but he talked about how Christianity and the principles behind it built the West and built the civilization around us. And I began to realize, boy, if I had to roll my dice on some theistic tradition, Christianity seems to have done the most amazing things in the world. But if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be a Catholic, you're going to be a Protestant, you're going to be Orthodox. Well, this is where I got into this notion that I realized these were all separate conversations I was having. You have to think about your belief structure in terms of these different conversations. I realized there's a conversation about just the nature of reality. And I think that by having that conversation, and this isn't stuff in the church that we even talk about necessarily in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Even outside the church, there's just the question of God. And I had that conversation and I got to that level. But then there's immediately the next conversation comes into view. Well, what about God? Who is this God? Has he ever manifested in the world in some way? And that led me to, and I'm not saying it led me to this, but I'm kind of going through this remodel. I'm going from the foundation up. And I realized that that leads me to Christianity. But then, see, this is where these other two levels of conversation, they're not really Mormon. These are deep conversations that all human beings have to face. But once someone arrives at a faith in Jesus Christ and they want to seek the Jesus of the New Testament, well, then there's a whole bunch of new questions. And boy, do we have some things to say about that. That's where the restoration really begins to speak. So I came to understand this notion of an inverted testimony. I realized there are a bunch of people that they would find out something about Joseph Smith that they maybe wouldn't agree with, or maybe the church had a policy they don't like, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know, they're an atheist. I'm going, what? I was like, this makes no sense. Why is it that if Joseph Smith wasn't who he claimed to be, that there's no God? That doesn't make any sense. And I came to realize that a lot of people, their testimony looks like this. In other words, they just grew up in the church, and if anything happened with the church, all of it would just collapse immediately. They believe in God because they were brought up in the church. But I didn't have that. It was different. It's because I believe in God that I believe in Jesus, and it's because I believe in Jesus that I believe he restored his church. And this made a big difference for me. It created a foundation. You all know this verse, so I'm not going to read it, but we have to build our foundation on Christ. I thought it was really interesting that right at the same time that some of these, I saw this and I realized it was like analogous to my life. The foundations of the Salt Lake Temple had to be renovated. And I realized that I had renovated deep down below. And the thing that didn't shake, why I felt more solid than I'd ever felt in my life in my testimony was because of a new foundation that I had laid at the base. I'm going to skip through some of these real quick, a little fast just for the sake of time. Actually, I will share this quote, though. Because a lot of people don't realize the role that sort of arguments and evidences and things like that play. They're not enough to tip the scales. But Neil A. Maxwell was fond of this quote by Austin Farrar that he was talking about C.S. Lewis. He says, though argument does not create conviction, lack of it destroys belief. What seems to be proved may not be embraced, but what no one shows the ability to defend is quickly abandoned. Rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish. That is the purpose of apologetics. You don't need apologetics to have a testimony, but it creates an environment where testimonies are more likely to flourish. So we load up our scales with reasons to believe. Let me see here, just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. So about 2018, this is about the time that I say that my remodel I started feeling like there wasn't much out there that I hadn't encountered, and that it was like I kind of know everything that the anti-Mormons are all saying, and all the haters and all that stuff, and it was kind of like I've heard it all. And I felt like I could deal with it all really well, and it wasn't like threatening to me personally, and I wanted to go and talk with others about it. I started a group originally called Think Tank, and then eventually Thoughtful Saints group on Facebook, and I would talk with people about, I'd basically debate and argue with people online in these forums. But as I did, this is actually probably where I learned to debate more than any. I was just in the comments constantly arguing with people about things. I eventually created a little blog because what I'd find is I make the same arguments over and over. And I created a blog with the purpose of me, I don't want to write the whole stupid thing out again, so I just linked the blog link. It was like, here's my argument, right? So it was kind of a time saver. And then on October 30th, 2020, I made my very first YouTube video because I thought instead of me sharing with them an article that they'll never read, I'll share with them a video where I read the article that I wrote, and then they'll actually watch it because they wouldn't read the stuff that I'd send. And what do you know? When it's funny, I didn't even realize this until I was preparing for this presentation. Who was it? The first video I ever made, who was it about? It was a response to Alex O'Connor. Isn't that funny? That'll come in a little later in the story here. For sake of time, so I'm going to keep this moving. This is an important exchange with Hayden Carroll. Nobody watched my channel, just so you guys know. I did not launch my channel, and everyone was like, oh, this is such a great channel. It was like, no one was really watching it. Few people that I would share it with in the Facebook forums. And then Hayden Carroll contacted me and said, hey, I have these guys who want to bring us on their podcast. And I didn't know Hayden except for online, but he knew I lived in Arizona, and so he was like, hey, Jacob, these evangelical missionaries came and were passing out anti-Mormon pamphlets. I talked to them. We all know Hayden likes to do that. And he was like, hey, I know, Jacob, that you like this kind of stuff. Will you come with me onto this show? And so I did. We went and did these 3 different discussions with these Calvinist Protestants, talking all about LDS beliefs. And it was a really great conversation. We decided that we were going to do a debate on it. We both felt like we understood each other. We wanted to do it publicly. I thought it was going to be on their podcast, which had 50 subscribers. But it turned out it was going to be hosted on Apologia Studios with 500,000 subscribers. So I was like, oh, well, this is kind of a big deal. And I thought it was going to be just in a studio. And they're like, no, we're doing it in our church with 200 people in the audience. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wild. So we do it. Hayden and I prepare, and I think it went pretty well. Well, I have a little clip here. Let's see if it plays. Uh-oh. Is the audio? Uh-oh, I'm not having my audio come through on this. Do we have... Let me see if we can get this working. Sorry, guys. See if I can get this going. Well, I think we might have to skip the clips. You guys can go watch it. But this video got 494,000 views, this debate. And it went pretty well. We ended up having Sam Shamoon, sorry for the grainy image. I have a video of his reaction, but I don't think it'll play. But Sam does not like Latter-day Saints. I'll tell you that right now. He's absolutely vicious and cruel and not good. But he was like, these Calvinists got wrecked by these Latter-day Saints. And so, sorry, I don't have the stuff. The audio won't come through. Anyway, well, guess what? Somebody in the audience saw that video or saw that debate. Old Cardin Ellis did. Let's give a hand to Cardin real quick. I have to say this about Cardin, and we all need to recognize it. For any of the stuff that Cardin says that makes us cringe a little bit, including saying that I was going to suck, he has... Is that he said? Okay, stink. That's it. We'll do it that way. Cardin has been a trailblazer in this space, okay? And I want that to be recognized. Sometimes the people who go and blaze the trail are the ones that are a little bit like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? They're that type. But I'm forever thankful for Cardin Ellis for inviting me on and for all the people he's empowered in this place. Let's give him a hand. And so he brought me on the old Midnight Mormon show, had a conversation, and eventually all of a sudden my channel started actually having people watch it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is cool. And I came to realize that one of the things people really liked about the channel was this. I began to realize that when you take a diamond and put it against a black background, that's where it shines. You need to have the contrast. Now, I love Jared Halverson, but I can tell you he actually gets this quote wrong. And one of these days I'm gonna talk to him about this. This was in a letter that Joseph wrote to someone who was writing about different religious denominations and their stories. And he kind of said, that's good, I'm glad you're doing that, because in proving contraries, or in testing, proving is like testing contrary ideas, truth is made manifest. In other words, what Joseph was saying wasn't the truth is in the middle. It's when you take opposing ideas and put them side by side publicly, and you engage them together, that's where you get truth to really shine. It's not enough just to talk about the truth. You also talk about its opposite. You contrast them. And so my mission in my channel is to strengthen faithful Latter-day Saints feeling the pressures of the world by instilling courage and confidence in the reality of God, Jesus Christ, and the restoration of his church by contrasting truth and falsehood. That is what my channel seeks to do. That's why I engage in debates and other things where different opposing sides are put side by side. And then this happened. One day Luke Hansen was talking online, Twitter, and Twitter's or X now, but Twitter, it's a weird place because you can literally like talk to people that are really, really big and they'll actually respond to you sometimes. And Luke ended up talking to him about doing a debate, and anyway, he's like, actually, and Trent was like, well, you haven't debated that much. Do you know anyone who's done debates before? And he's like, well, talk to Jacob. And Trent was like, yeah, let's do it. So I was like, holy cow. And so Trent Horn, who's probably the best-known Catholic apologist, on the biggest Catholic channel, Pints with Aquinas, decided that we wanted to do a debate on if the Book of Mormon was divinely inspired. Again, you guys can go on my channel to see on how some of that went. But it got 274,000 views. And again, a positive response even from people who aren't Latter-day Saints. In the comments, there were comments like this: as an Orthodox Christian, I've learned one thing from this debate: don't underestimate the LDS position. I remain absolutely unconvinced, but I do see that LDS arguments aren't always the straw men that we make them out to be. I respect Jacob for making a solid case for his position. Guys, dang, this guy's impressive, totally unconvinced the Book of Mormon is true, but that is the first time I've ever heard a real reasonable defense of it. So then came the next crazy thing. This journey just was like, are you kidding me? Like, how are these things happening? All of a sudden, I got invited to go on Jubilee. They were doing a 25 Christians versus 1 atheist episode. And I got invited. And so it ends up being Alex O'Connor. We didn't know who it was going to be. And my very first video was about Alex O'Connor. So I've been following Alex for a long time. And we end up, out of all the people, actually, I'll go back to this slide. Out of all the people, at the end, he had to pick someone that he got to debate. Because we all got to debate him on something. But then we had to put forth a proposition, and then he would do that. Now, I was sitting there with my little piece of paper, and he said, write down what you're gonna debate, your proposition that you have to defend. And so I go, like, what are the chances? There's 25 people here. What's the chances I'm going to get picked? And so I write down on there, the restored gospel has the most rationally defensible, or most rationally coherent and defensible notion of God there is, or out of all creedal groups or whatever. And all of a sudden, at the end of the debate, when he has to make his pick, he picks me. And I was like, oh no. Like, I just wrote this down. And remember, I'm surrounded by 25 other creedal Christians who don't know that I'm a Latter-day Saint even. And then I have 10 million people watching. And I remember, I literally, as I walked up with the piece of paper, I thought to myself, and I was like, let's do this. like, here's our chance, baby. When else am I going to get the chance in front of 10 million people to make this sort of a statement? 11 million. Oh, now they're up to 11 million subscribers. And the video has 8 million views on it now. 11 million. Is it up to 11 now? Holy cow. I haven't watched it for a while. Anyway, so this whole experience leads to, again, sorry. So afterwards, Alex invites some of us to go to dinner with him. And it just so happens I end up sitting right in front of Alex, and we talked for 6 hours about all sorts of stuff. And we kind of just became friends. And ends up that he, let me see here. I have the clip of this. Some of you might have seen it. But Ruslan asks Alex, out of all the Christian denominations, like, which ones would you join? And what does he say? He goes, Mormonism, of course. Now, To be fair, I think he was trolling them a little bit, but they kind of pressed him like, oh, well, they're not Christians. He goes, actually, they have kind of an interesting theology and an interesting history. And he pushed back. And I was like, and he said he had never known that Joseph Smith was a presidential candidate when he'd be assassinated. He didn't know about the Missouri Extermination Order, and begins telling Ruslan about all these things. Ruslan is a big Christian podcaster, like 900,000 subscribers. And Ruslan is kind of like, what? Like, I didn't expect that. And it was all the stuff that I had talked with Alex about. So I was like, that's so cool. Anyway, this is the exchange. But Ruslan then does this Bless God conference. I actually went to it because I found out that Alex was going to be there. Ended up, and it was really funny because when we were done with the whole conference, I got to meet a whole bunch of these big Christian YouTubers. Alex does this big debate. After the debate, my brother and me and Luke Hansen, we go to In-N-Out Burger, and in the door walks Alex O'Connor, Ruslan, all these other big Christian YouTubers. And so we all, hey! And they're like, hey! And then we all sit down together, and again, we have another like 4-hour conversation, and we're talking about all this stuff. So really cool experience with Alex, and got to know Ruslan. And so what about the future of the channel? As we kind of get down on time here with this. I want to keep doing this because we have a theology that can stand toe-to-toe with any theological system out there. Not only toe-to-toe, it can stand head and shoulders above. And nobody talks about that. And so I actually have, as I had mentioned to some of you, I have a debate scheduled on Capturing Christianity, almost 400,000 subscribers, with Joe Heschmeyer on the Great Apostasy. It's going down in Utah on December 19th. Again, I'll have that chance to get in front of the audience, contrast the views publicly, so the truth can be made more manifest. I'm actually going on Ruslan's show. So what was the first thing Ruslan said when Alex, he said, they're not Christian. Well, in 2 weeks, or maybe it's 3 weeks, about 3 weeks, first week of December, I'm going on Ruslan's show, and guess what question we're going to discuss? If Latter-day Saints are Christians. So stay tuned for that one. Ruslan also, so last year he did, in 2025, I went to that conference. Alex O'Connor was the headline debater against David Wood at the conference. So in the conference, they do a debate as kind of the main event of the evening, right, of the whole conference. It's kind of like everyone shows up for that. Everyone's excited. It was fun. It was like going to a prize fight or something. Like everyone's like, oh, who's going to win? Well, guess who's, right now at least, we've verbally agreed to it. Guess who the headline debate is going to be? Hopefully I don't stink, because it's me, and I'll be debating the subject of the Trinity in front of people like Wes Huff, Ruslan, and a bunch of other big YouTubers. So, anyway, we already went through that. Why am I doing this? Is it because I want to go and be famous or something like that? Like, no, I don't even care. And none of this is about that. It's about these messages that I've gotten. It's about people like you that I've met who've told me your stories. It's about the fact that I have a family where I have 8 siblings. My parents are still active, but I'm the only active one of their children in the church. And if I can make a difference to people who are struggling. Now you'll notice people have up here, I was on the road to removing my name from the records of the church, then I discovered Thoughtful Faith, Quick Media, and others. In other words, these other podcasters. There are real people whose lives are touched by these. And as I've come to experience and get to know these people, it changed suddenly. I remember the first time I got one of these, I was like, oh crap, people are listening to me. I gotta be careful. And I also want to say that to all of you right now. Don't listen to me per se, okay? If I give you something that helps, great. But if I go out there and get my butt kicked on a debate, don't worry, the church is still true, okay? And Follow the brethren. Follow the Savior. Read your scriptures. Do the fundamental things. Because ultimately, what we're trying to build is a meaningful life. That's what this is about. It's about having a meaningful life and a meaningful eternity. My siblings, I love them all dearly. I still have very good relations with all my siblings, by the way. It's been a road. I know many of you can relate to that. But ultimately, my relationships with them, and more importantly with these people, are ultimately what the gospel is trying to build and do. These theological conversations, these debates, they're fun, they're all that. But at the end of the day, at the heart of the gospel is to love God and then to love your fellow man, starting with the people closest to you. Zion emerges from the inside out. And ultimately, we have to remember it's about him, not us. And I leave that with you all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.